talk a little bit more about Planet X tonight. And folks, I'll say this, as far as Planet X is concerned, I've never had a doubt that any of that's possible and that any of it is, there is a lot of truth there. I mean, I read about it in 83 when I was in school, so I remember, okay? But what I don't trust is a lot of the people who are putting out if you notice, most of these people are putting out the same thing the guy before them put out, and the same thing the guy before them put out. And then some of them had a wild story about how the ETs picked them up and told them about it. Now, that could be true. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm just saying, for me, I need a little more than that. If I'm going to go with it and I'm going to pack my bags and head to the nearest mountain, I really need to know a little more about it. And you should need to as well. But Matthew, I welcome you back to Late Night in the Midlands. And how are you tonight? And I thought maybe we could start maybe a little bit. I know we talked about, we're going to get into, I think, the pyramids and so on tonight, and I thought maybe we could start a little bit with Planet X again, because it seems to be a hot topic with so many people. And so,
okay, well, that's great. I'll be glad to. I don't know if you saw the pictures that I posted on your Late Night in the Midlands Facebook page. You have several of them, but I think it was Late Night in the Midlands that I posted some pictures, and there were a few comments of the pictures I took this past winter in January. Now, like I had told you before, whether or not, I don't know enough about orbital mechanics. I don't know enough about things that I don't have enough knowledge.
See, and you'll admit that.
What it is. I just know that it's unusual. Yeah. What I spotted was unusual, and I was very lucky to get those shots. But I can't say with any certainty. But what I can say is that it's just an integral part of this whole story of mine, the Alpha to Omega, that I think is really important. And I want to set the record straight tonight, because I think that there is a lot that can be exposed, which is the short-sighted nature of religion, history, and science is exposed by this story. It's quite remarkable, and not because I wrote it, but because that's what people tell me. For those who do take the time to look, read, and ask questions, they're quite amazed, and that's what gives me the energy to keep moving forward and to keep trying to present these things to you. So that's really where we're headed tonight, I hope.
Well, good, yeah, and that is where we're headed tonight. And you know what I love, Matthew, is that you'll admit that, you don't know. It could be anything. But, that's why when a guy like you shares something with me, I feel more comfortable with looking at it and taking time with it, because I know that you're just trying to get to the truth. But, the ones that bother me are the ones that are out there and they're taking somebody else's works and findings and they're throwing it out there as their own, and then they're running with it. Like, this is true. The ETs told me, or Jesus come back and told me, and all these things. And see, they hit you with what, of course, it could be true. They could be telling us the truth, but there's never no evidence, and you're looking for the evidence, and I appreciate that.
Well, I think I'm using the same evidence that supports other theories to provide a new theory. And that's because I'm using the religious, the historical, and the scientific evidence and combining them in a unique way. And this didn't just happen overnight. This took many years of research and critical thought. And that's what's important in humanity, is that we have this will to survive and to also to think critically about things and to seek, like I said, seek and you shall find. Now, that doesn't mean that if you seek to find the answers to Nibiru, you're going to find them, but if you seek to find the answers, in my case, by seeking to find the answers to the Book of Revelation, I learned a lot more, not only about what an apocalypse is, but that inseparable bond, because we spoke about the metaphysics of truth the other night, and the three important principles to the metaphysics of truth is that truth is immutable, it never changes, only our perceptions change, and there is an inseparable bond between past and future. It's the cause and effect of beliefs and choices influenced by them, and we prove that just in the demonstration. If you believe you could jump off a cliff and you do, you're going to find quickly that you can't.
That's
or
right.
That you're going to have unwanted consequences. So an apocalypse is really a disclosure of knowledge, either through harsh experiences that enlighten us or through the insights of our wisdom. And that works on an individual scale and a collective scale, and we see how the collective consciousness is responsible for the myriad uncertainties observed at the quantum level. In other words, those uncertainties that have given rise to theories for alternate universes are really, that evidence to me is proof that all of the possible combination of human choices up to any given fraction of a second, and in this case 7 billion possible combinations in all different ways, relates to every trillionth of a second or less. And that's what we observe at the quantum level, is this uncertainty. So we see it at that level, and it doesn't mean that there are separate laws for quantum physics. It means that that's where the evidence of this quantum choice, all these possible choices exist, and that's where we see them. So on this level, it appears static, but it's a constantly changing illusion. And so rather than try to confuse it with science too much, I think what we need to do is talk about the reason why we haven't been able to connect the dots precisely to human history, ancient myths, and the entire human journey, because we're failing to link it to the single most important aspect of our journey, and that is our purpose for being. And we proved in the Metaphysics of Truth that we're here for one purpose only, and that is to discover all truth. If we extrapolate our progress, and if we don't become extinct, one day we are going to have a much higher level of power. So what I want to begin with is in the understanding of Alpha to Omega is to put a label, because in this story there are two axioms, and the first is, and I think it's real easy to understand, is that the Alpha and the Omega are the representation, or they signify the perfect expression of supreme physical, intellectual, and spiritual achievement. So right now we're in a certain level now, and we're still confused. But if we can understand that our reality is created by collective choices, then if we were all in this collective way, like in the lesser creatures, like in the birds, the bees, the beavers who build dams, they build dams and nobody teaches them, but they're not individuals. They do everything in accordance with the species. They're connected. We've lost that connection. And when we get it, and we reach our ultimate achievement, we will reach the Omega. But what I'd like to present is that at one time, we were an Alpha, which was the same thing. So just like in the Mahayugas of Hindu religion, and we see that cycle that goes from the gold to the silver to the bronze to the dark ages, and then back upwards from bronze to silver to gold, is really the same type of thing that is happening. But we want to try and explain some of the scientific mysteries that exist and put them in the right place. In other words, what I've done is find a place for everything and put everything in its place. And when you hear the story, you go, wow, I never looked at it that way. And I say, yes, I know. And so that's what my books are about. I wrote Alpha to Omega, Journey to the End of Time, and back in the late 90s I wrote Heretical Wisdom, The Truths from Within. And I also wrote a 5-volume ebook series called Apocalypse Now, and there's 5 volumes, and each of those 5 volumes are principles that exist within the within the Alpha to Omega, and each of them is spread out through Alpha to Omega, but they're just little glimpses so you can understand more completely what Alpha to Omega Journey to the End of Time is. It really is what I call the greatest story never told. So the first axiom is that at one time there was a supreme race, and we see that with all these the evidence of ancient mysteries and all of the scientific mysteries, Göbekli Tepe, Tiwanaku, Teotihuacan, the Olmecs, the Aztecs, the Inca, all of the Pumapunku, Easter Island, these things are evidence that there was something greater. But what I've been trying to tell those or explain to those who have been advocates of this evidence and trying to to piece it together. They believe that this evidence means that there was a previous society somewhere around 15,000 or 20,000 years ago, or 10, somewhere around there, where these people were more advanced. Yes, they were, but this is not the alpha. And so what we need to do is find a way to answer questions that come from this hypothesis. Like, if there was a supreme society, how is it possible for a supreme society to become extinct? And you know, what possible evidence do we have for a super society outside of those things? Because I want to try and prove that this ancient society existed many, many, many years ago, back to about 4 million years ago or more, when it is reported in historical books like Columbia's History of the World, that the last known pole shift occurred in late tertiary time, which is about somewhere between 7 and 4 million BC, and that this pole shift coincided with the beginning of the freezing of the ice in the Antarctica, and the shifting of poles to their current locations from the Indian Ocean and eastern, I forget where right now, but and I do have it in my book, and it's it has a reference, and it tells you where to go to find that reference. But in any case, what I'm trying to prove is that this happened, and then so an arc we see is not a boat, but something like a rainbow, an arc, A-R-C, that bridges the gap between two completely different civilizations and two completely different points in time. But why? Why were they trying to not just save the species? What were they doing? They wanted to make sure that the next civilization didn't make the same mistake that they did. Because you want to say, well, how did a supreme society become extinct? Well, if from the metaphysics of truth, we understand that when we reach this potential where we're all connected and we're all collectively one, then any individual or selfish, egocentric ideal to use or utilize this power for personal gain will destroy over time, will begin the denigration of this collective consciousness.
But that's what they're doing.
Have to go ahead.
I say, but that's what they're doing. They're using it for power and control.
Well, in this world, we never had it. In this epoch of humanity, what we're going to see is that it never was here. And so, what we understand by, like I said, in the metaphysics of truth, that God is all truth and sin is the failure to know all truth. Well, this generation never knew all truth, but what is being spread predominantly about all these ancient mysteries is that ancient aliens did it. And I'm going to show that that's not only short-sighted but dangerous, because the ancient aliens are not extraterrestrial. They are living on this earth, and the reason is because of what happened in the beginning. So if we understand that at one time man had, a supreme race had all of this power, then we can understand what the true battle between good and evil really was. And that was that we have the highest level of human existence is what I would call the supreme being is Alpha, and Omega is supreme being, not to be confused with God, but to understand that the essence that creates us, that essence that exists in every living thing, is the only reason why we can become supreme being and have this ultimate power. And so if a previous race of people were to see the power they had, and instead of realizing that if it weren't for this essence itself, which is God, if it weren't for that essence that exists in every living thing, that gives the creatures all this power, they wouldn't have power at all or even have life. And so that is the mistake, and to believe that they can do what they will as long as no one else cares would be fine. Actually, because of the metaphysics of truth, like I said, nothing is random or happenstance, so over time, the truth is going to reveal itself, because that's the third principle to the metaphysics of truth. The truth is always trying to reveal itself to us, so that it will reveal the wrong by harsh experience, because they didn't use their wisdom,
And
so the destruction came.
And I agree, Matthew, because on a small scale, you get, say, media trolls, and the same thing comes out. They portray themselves as something, and then the truth eventually comes out, and they're seen for who they really are. And so I agree. I could kind of connect on a small scale there, and give an example.
Well, everything is fractals, and everything, what is in the microcosm is in the macrocosm. That's the whole idea that truth is immutable. Whatever we observe on one scale must be true on all levels, whether we see it or not. It's only our perception changes, not truth. Truth is universal and unchanging, and so is the essence that exists in every living thing. So like I tried to tell you, that this essence, just tried to, for an analogy, let's try to see it as like on Men in Black, that little object that was around the cat's neck, that galaxy, that thing, that essence exists, and its sole purpose is to manipulate energy and matter and to become perfectly and completely expressed in the physical realm, and only the highest creatures who have free will can totally and perfectly express that. So we say, well, that will never happen. Well, it will, and I can demonstrate through the book of Revelation and through this story what happens. But there, like I said, so what I'm trying to prove here is that there is the first axiom to understanding the story of the human journey is the alpha to omega, and that is from a supreme society to another supreme society one day in the future. And that is the cycle. And that cycle, what we have to understand is that there are different levels of existence between alpha to omega. And that helps us to understand some of the other things. But what I think is really important is that we have to realize that the unearthed ancient wonders are evidence for lost human potentials. But how did they get them? Most people believe that those lost human potentials were given to us by aliens, but that's not true. What I'm trying to show is that our previous society, and I'm going to provide some evidence here that's going to be pretty mind-boggling, that this previous society that existed, Noah and his sons, are the gods of ancient Egypt and Greece, and they're mating with the supreme Egyptians because of, now we have to get to the second principle, the second axiom to my book, and to this theory. First of all, we have to understand about history. I think I asked everyone to try and read that excerpt from my website, The History of History, at MatthewPetty.com. And if you did, you'll see that the earliest times of writing were, in Sumer, Mesopotamia, and Egypt, going back to 3000, 2600, and 2700 BC, respectively, where we actually see evidence of written documents. Now, it may have gone back to 3400 in some areas, but these are very ancient, but what we see is that they have remarkably similar tales of ancient gods, flood legends, and whatnot that had been handed down for a long time. They mysteriously compare with one another in these subject matter, and why do they resemble the earliest Hebrew accounts in Genesis?
Well, you're right.
Because if we can,
I was going to say you're right. These are stories that were from a long time ago, and some people think that like they're 2,000 years old.
Well, if we can demonstrate the reason for the urgency to record information, because it does seem like it was an urgent attempt to explain something, whereas prior to that, for thousands of years, which is evident in all of the flood legends that emerged all over the earth, that were not connected to anyone else, but they all had these eerily same ideas. Why? How? So it's apparent that monumental world-changing events precipitated writing, because all of the earliest writings are focused on the same core themes. And, if we take, most people don't understand that religion and history began as the same discipline. The earliest 5 books of the Bible, or known as the Pentateuch, were developed over a period of 1,000 years that began after the Exodus, which is believed to be somewhere around 1450 BC, although there's a lot of argument over that. But they were derived from various sources, despite religious claims, and intricately woven together by the 6th century BC, when they became solidified. So that means that by 600 BC, when they finally became solidified, Moses wasn't alive to explain what had remained of what were 1,000-year-old scrappy ledgers, and they were descriptions of events that had occurred almost 2,000 years prior. So we see that there was a consortium or a power that be, so to speak, that was able to gather people together by writing what really happened and everyone trying to agree. But what we also see is within 100 years after the earliest Pentateuch of the Bible, Herodotus was enlisted by Greek authorities to compile separate accounts of history. And so, you know, Herodotus, he's known as the pioneer of history, and he was followed by a couple of other Greek and Egyptian historians who were also commissioned by regional powers, because what they saw was that this writing and convincing other people to try and quell the masses, because there was a lot of anarchy. And what caused that anarchy? Well, we're going to go back and we're going to explain what caused that anarchy and all this confusion that led to the writing of history and all the different opinions. Because when Greek leaders enlisted scholars to gather information, they were still talking about their old beliefs of ancient gods and the pagan beliefs. But the pagan beliefs, we're going to also see, were something that became, you know, a little contorted over time when there really were ancient gods. But these ancient gods were not ancient aliens. There was a fork in the road. And that fork in the road was when oral tradition, which I'm going to prove was not oral tradition, but more telepathic, and that this oral tradition became separated by that central authority in written documents. But why? I mean, you know, we can look at Manetho and Berosus, who were also sanctioned in the 3rd century by King Ptolemy of Egypt. Was Manetho. He was a priest, and he was going back to information that correlated to the oral traditions, and he was finding that, you know, dating back to 21,000 BC, or with 17,500 years of divine rule in Egypt, before there was any pharaoh that ever ruled over Egypt. And he talks about a 350-year chaotic period that was before the reign of the first pharaoh, known as Menes, or Mene. And very little is known about that first dynasty of Mene and the succeeding second dynasty, and both of them preceded the Old Kingdom, which is where we find the most magnificent things. But the Old Kingdom begins with the 3rd dynasty of Zoser at 2700 BC or so. But the Old Kingdom by itself is a huge mystery to historians who cannot understand how the Old Kingdom even happened. And the more that they discover, the more they go back in time, the more they see evidence of things that were even more advanced than at the time of Dozier, and it doesn't make sense. Yet these things are only discovered by those who really dig, and the mainstream is not told about it. But I think what we need to do is try to connect the Great Flood, or this great deluge of someone, to a time way beyond 12 to 40,000 years ago, which is guys like Graham Hancock. He's amazing in all his discoveries, but I think, and I've attempted to reach out to him, and I think he understands, but he really believes that because of these other ancient mysteries that we see in you know, Tiwanaku, Teotihuacan, the Göbekli Tepe, and all these mysteries, he equates them to the same time. However, there is one big difference between those and what I consider the biggest lie on earth, and that is the Great Pyramid. Now, this is something that in my philosophy, or my theosophy, or my theory, is the second axiom, which should be easy to accept, taking into consideration what I've spoken about and what I'm going to speak about later, and that is that the Great Pyramid was the cause, not the effect, of societal supremacy of ancient Egypt, and that it was the ark, or the ageless time machine that served as an arc, like a rainbow that connected two completely different civilizations and two completely different points in time. And it's funny because now you can look it up on Google and you're going to find nothing but stories about the Great Pyramid and how it was a time machine. Now, I've been saying it for a long time, and I only know of one person, and the ironic part is I didn't know about this person until about a year after I wrote Alpha to Omega, and that's the man named Joe Parr, and I'm sure you've heard of him. He died in 2010, and he was proving he had scientific knowledge. He was an engineer with 40 years of experience in electronics engineering, and he invented the gamma ray transducer, and he had a law degree. He was very, very smart guy, and he believed that the energy field that he discovered around the Great Pyramid has like a bubble or orb, and it was strengthened or weakened by certain kinds of energy, and he was trying to prove that this could have been easily a time machine.
Now, what about the other pyramids around the world? Were they also the same?
No, I'm sorry. The only one that stands above and beyond anything on Earth, and I think I briefly touched on Gary Osborne the other night, there is nothing on Earth that stands above the Great Pyramid. And it's funny because the first glaring conflict that startled my attention occurred in the late 70s when my curiosity led me to the Great Pyramid.
Then what were...
At that time...
I'm sorry, but then what were the other pyramids? What were they for? Were they... I mean, they had no connection. I mean, were people trying to duplicate and failing, or was it...
Yes. These, in my opinion... These were, and we're going to see how this Great Pyramid not only allowed for the evolution that helped catalyze that served as a catalyst to a new race, and had within it 6 survivors or 8 survivors that were superhuman in our eyes, not of course in the eyes of the absolute God, but in the eyes of us. If we were to see them, they were superhuman, and they could do things, and they lived for 1,000 years. And the Great Pyramid was when it finally broke down to where they understood what was going on before this conflict that started the early writings. What we're going to see is that these people were superhuman, not like the previous race, but they were like the beauty of an unthinking rose, a superb person whoever evolved near the pyramid were superb, and that's why the Egyptians were so superb. But they served as mates to these people, and that's why we see the evidence of not just ancestral marriage in biblical texts and even other texts, including the Enuma Elish, and we see that these people were very much, when we talk about the demigods of ancient Egypt and Greece and Rome, this was going on for thousands and thousands of years. And I'm going to show you the evidence of that in a minute, or talk about it. But the first thing, what I really think is important, and I don't care, I think this is extremely important, is that the Great Pyramid is one of the least talked about things in the classroom. It's just, hey, the Great Pyramids were built, and they built them as tombs for Egyptians. It is the biggest lie on earth. And not only is it the biggest lie, but in their attempt to prevent us from seeing the truth, I think we can go back to the mid-1800s, mid to late 1800s, when Charles Piazzi Smith and William Flinders Petrie and John Taylor were examining this edifice, and they were true scientists, mathematicians, and they looked at this thing and they said, there is no way that the Egyptians built this or that it was a tomb. But nothing changed, and nothing would change, and it never got into the classrooms. It's not like it just happened in the late, sometime in the mid to late 20th century. This was in the 19th century when people were writing fantastic books. I have Charles Piazzi Smith's book, our inheritance in the Great Pyramid. I have a PDF photocopy of it, and I want to tell you something. That was the most complete up until some of the times later, in the late 20th century, where people really were starting to, examine it with lasers and things. But these discoveries should be presented in classrooms throughout the world so students can begin with a better understanding of the mysteries that surround it, so that they can begin to think. We talk about that critical thinking. And
do you think it's possible
what?
Do you think it's possible to fire this thing up today?
Well, I can get into that a little bit,
okay,
and it will talk about it later. But I really believe that the piece that was missing off the Great Pyramid's top, the capstone, was what most people are referring to as the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, according to Christopher Dunn, who was another one I quoted in my book, and he was talking about this being a very huge energy machine. But he did prove to a great extent that it was a machine because of his engineering background. But what he said is that the capstone is missing, and whatever it was served as to help it. But if we understand this, that it was something that, to me, the capstone to the endeavor is conducive with what the capstone is. And so if the endeavor was to be the light of truth in this new world, and to be ageless, timeless, and to be a capsule, we have to understand that possibility definitely exists. And I can't wait until Gary Osborne comes out with his stuff, and I'm going to give you some information for him, for all the listeners, so that they can go back and take a look at his website. It's amazing. But I think, I know that your listeners must have heard much about the Great Pyramid. Like I had said the other night, we've got 10% of the people in the world who are really seeking truth, and they don't know where to go. Because I listened to your earlier diatribe, and I understand your frustration. But there are so many truth seekers, and so many theories, and so many things. Where do we go? And we talked about that in the Metaphysics of Truth. Everyone has beliefs, and that's what creates our reality. Our reality is created by the choices that stem from our beliefs, and that's why my tagline in Alpha to Omega Journey to the End of Time says, awaken to the inherited assumptions that shape our destiny, because it's our assumptions that shape our destiny. Until we are collectively aligned, like we were talking about earlier, we will be a separate race, and we're either going to get collectively aligned because we're smart enough to figure it out, or great things, terrible things are going to happen. Well, I don't like to call them terrible, because to me, anything that happens because there's no randomness. It's the truth trying to reveal itself. And if it weren't for the Christ principle, which I hope to get to tonight, this process would just go on and on to where there's extinctions and going on and end. But because of the Christ principle, and this is so important, it won't happen again. This is the last time. And how we link that together is important. Now, as soon as I bring up the word Christ, Jesus Christ, I can just feel the people of the 10% cringing with the idea of Jesus Christ. And then I also feel, when I start talking about the Jesus Christ the way I've been shown through my seeking and my wisdom, and without adherence to the so-called authorities, and believing that if you seek, you shall find, I feel them cringe, because they are also misconceived. And so, to my opinion, after close to 40 years of this now, is to say, hey, there's a little bit missing here in religion, there's a little bit missing here in history, and a little bit missing here in science. And if we tell a decent story, it's going to expose those misconceptions in the light of a new story that answers more questions that are left on the table. But once we learn the facts about the Great Pyramid, it's impossible to accept the intimidating claims that a civilization one step removed from the Stone Age built this magnificent edifice. I mean, it's one of mankind's most problematical mysteries. Even Graham Hancock said it in one of his most recent videos, where it is probably the most mysterious building on the planet. Well, we can't deny that, but we have to say, okay, Well, why? Okay, who could have built it? When we look at the facts around it, it's impossible to assume that anyone, even those who built Tiwanaku and the Colosseum and Easter Island, could not have built the Great Pyramid that has so many mathematical synchronicities that show that the builders of this machine, this building, were completely awakened to how everything ties together. Three distinctive elements need to be considered to evaluate it properly. Its size, its weight, and its positioning is first. Second, the unmatched degree of accuracy. And third, the astonishing mathematical correlations designed in its construction. It depicts the knowledge of Earth's exact solar year, its radius, its circumference, its diameter, its weight. It's got a perfect 1 in 43,200 ratio to everything. It is just outstanding. It's almost supernatural.
And it's kind of, I'm sorry, it's just kind of funny how they tell us that people who use stone tools built these things, and we're supposed to believe it with all that you just mentioned that goes into it.
Well, we're not supposed to believe it. We do believe it because most people don't seek. We're in a very complacent world. And when people talk about they or the people that are in control, just remember this. They're in control because we're not seeking and we're not out there demanding truth.
Amen.
Because we're not saying, hey, wait a minute, you know? So we're just as much a part of this so-called beast because there are three parts to the beast. And the first part of the beast already exists. And it's a runaway train. It's not going to stop unless we all get together to stop it or disaster strikes and we start from scratch. But we're not going to start from scratch and go over again like before because, like I said, because of the Christ principle, which I'm going to introduce, it cannot happen again. But let's consider this Great Pyramid. A lot of people think, you know, oh, it's really, we could do that. They put shows on TV that is an insult to my intelligence when they try to tell us how these blocks, these 2.3 million blocks of limestone, were dragged across the desert and put into place with optician's tolerance without even a wheel. And to say that they dragged it up these ramps and then they had the ramp theory and they had to get rid of the ramp theory and then they said, well, the ramps go around. Face it, there is no way. And these 2.3 million blocks were clearly close to 3 tons. But there were many that exceeded 30 tons. And inside the pyramid and over 200 feet above the ground are over 100 fine red granite blocks that weigh more than 75 tons each. Each of the 4 sides is 755 feet long. It sits on a 13 and a quarter acre base, and it's level to within a thousandth of an inch over the whole thing. It sits on the largest underground mountain of bedrock on Earth. It separates the quadrants of the entire Earth directly right in the middle. It's oriented to the 4 cardinal points of the compass, and the 144,000 casing stones made out of fresh Tora limestone are missing, most of them, but they were placed with such precision that 0.02 of an inch separated each, and the mortar is still undefined. Nobody knows where this mortar came from. And yet, each of them averaged 5 feet by 8 feet by 6 feet and weighed 15 tons. And you're going to, oh, well, they dragged them across it. They wet the sand. Stop with this stuff. Please. When are we going to wake up? It upsets me so much. But, you know, when you talk about this in church or you try to talk to people in church about the Great Pyramid, they go, oh, we don't have to know about that. Yes, you do, because the deception that's coming ahead has a lot to do with these things. And that's what this is all about. It's understanding what we missed so that the book of Revelation makes sense and what is coming next and why. And it's right on our doorstep. And I am so... The Great Pyramid weighs in excess of 6.3 million tons. Now, just to put that into just a little bit of, and it's 480 feet high, just to give this a little, it is more than 8 times the combined weight of the defunct World Trade Center towers. And it was taller than any building until 2004. in New Jersey anyway. 30 Empire State Buildings could be built with their stones. A wall 3 foot high and 1 foot thick could be built across the United States and back. And if the Egyptians built it as suggested by conjecture, because it's certainly not evidence, during 23-year reign of Cheops, it would have taken more than 19 of these blocks per hour to be set into place in a workday of 14 hours per day, 7 days per week for 23 years. That's one block every 3 minutes. That's not enough time to even put the ropes on it, let alone carry it. And according to Christopher Dunn, it would have taken 27 years, and this was according to his research and speaking to modern-day quarry experts, it would have taken 27 years just to quarry and deliver the stone. It is enormous, but most people don't know about it. And when you look at all of the other things, if you construct a four-sided building with intent to orient it each side to all four cardinal points, it's exponentially more difficult than trying to orient just one side to one place. But do you know that they're off by only 3/15 of a degree true north and the Greenwich Observatory, which was, each side is almost perfect, but the Greenwich Observatory is only trying to be oriented to true north, and it is off more than all the four sides of the Great Pyramid. I mean, it's remarkable. It's level to within less a 1,000 inch per foot over a 13 1/4 acre base. It's not even a half an inch, a 7/8 of an inch across the entire thing. And it wasn't built on a flat surface. It was built on jagged rock outcrops. Can you imagine how hard it would have been just to dress these rocks so that they would fit on the outcrop of rock perfectly and stay level, and then build these things and then put the heavy Torah limestone on so that they would be perfect too? Come on, cut me a break. It's like, and I am so aggravated how people tell. I don't care if somebody hung me up on a cross or threw me in a river. I'd say, I don't care, kill me, because I'm not going to say yes. Like, this is bull. And they were telling us this since the mid 1800s. And they just, when I say they, I'm talking about the researchers like William Flinders Petrie and John Taylor, just to name a few. There were so many. Do you know the Grand Gallery rises up for 153 feet at a constant slope of 26 degrees with a vaulted ceiling of 28 feet? And it was structurally built to withstand more than 70% of the pyramid's weight. They were laid together so closely with such rigor of precision that the joints were almost invisible to the naked eye. And this isn't my personal discovery. These are quotes from the several books of researchers who have done it. And I thank God that, I was able to read this stuff, because I wasn't able to get there myself.
Well, that's phenomenal. It is. It's what you just said. Yeah, come on, people.
There are so much. Do you know that John Taylor proved that the pyramid builders understood the number pi and incorporated it into the construction of the pyramid, because pi is a constant number with infinitely repeating decimals. And it expressed the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter and radius. So, in as much as you could square a circle, if in order for the math to apply, that is where the height represents the radius of the circle, so 2 times the radius times pi would equal the perimeter of 3,023 feet. And in order to do that, the angled slope had to be exactly 51 degrees, 51 seconds, and 51 minutes and 14 seconds to achieve the proper height and maintain the pi ratio. Now, you're going to try to tell me that a bunch of goofy Egyptians were dragging blocks and they set them? Do you know that? And then when you look at Gary Osborne's work, and I think you need to go to, let's see, I wrote it down, and it is GaryOsborne.moonfruit.com/sacred-earth moon geometry. I want to tell you something. When you look at all of this stuff, and I'm not finished just telling you what I already know, but he's discovering even more and more, and he is really helping me to stick with my assertion that this was not built by anyone in this epoch. It is separate from all the other ancient mysteries that we're trying to link these. We're erroneously linking this to the others, and that's wrong. It's just mind-boggling, all of the things that the pyramid embodies the constant scale ratio. I think I said it, of 1 in 43,200. The height of 481 feet multiplied times 43,200 equals 3,935 miles, which is the polar radius of the Earth within 15 miles. The perimeter of the pyramid is 3,023 feet, and that equates to 24,735 miles, which is within 200 miles of the equatorial circumference. If you measure, now you know what precession of the equinox is, right?
Sure.
That's, it's the result of the Earth's wobble as it spins, much like a top or gyroscope, and it's known to be 25,826 years, not quite 360 times 72. It's like, and guess what? The sum of the diagonals of the Great Pyramid are 25,826 pyramid inches. Very simple to figure out. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Use 9,131 inches for each side. For the A and B side, add it up. Do the, square them both. Square one, multiplied times 2, and because they're the same size, and then get the square root of that and multiply it times 2, and it's 25,826 pyramid inches. It's pretty remarkable that happens to be the same. It's just out of control. I mean, there is so much more detail and so many things that you can talk about that you could fill volumes. I read several books back in the 70s, and I was convinced then that this was the Ark. And this was before I knew anything else. This was after my epiphany, after the things that happened to me, and suddenly I was convinced that this was the building from the previous generation. And I pictured it as the so-called device that ameliorated the evolutionary process of the death of the regeneration of life after after death, and all the and I also saw that Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and their wives were inside or in somewhere in the vicinity of this thing, whether it be underground or whatever, and they were suspended in time. And now we hear all this stuff about time machines for the Great Pyramid, and yet we're still not putting it together. The ramp theory, forget about it. But, Gary Osborne did one of the things that he did that was really interesting. One of his most fantastic discoveries was getting a scale model of the Earth and putting it on paper, and then superimposing the Great Pyramid as it relates by putting where the pyramid is located, its apex, on the 30-degree parallel north of the equator. Okay? Mm-hmm. Or wherever it's located. I believe it's 30. And what he did was drew the pyramid and then crossed the pyramid. Now lays over the Earth, and you could see this on his site as well. And he put the ecliptic plane and the north-south axis plane and the equator through the center, connecting. And guess where they come? They fall right into the center of the King's Chamber. And ironically, the King's Chamber is not set directly under the apex of the pyramid. It was always off-centered. Nobody knew why or even cared. There didn't seem to be any reasoning behind it. But Gary is a master of geometry and looking at these angles and triangles and some of his newest stuff with the Pythagorean theorem, the 3, 4, 5 triangle and how it relates to putting an Earth and then the moon on top of it reveals even more. That shows that the builders of this thing were trying to talk in a universal language, but also that the builders were nearly perfect human beings to incorporate all of this perfection into the building itself. You know, nobody could have forethought something like this, where the more we discover, the more we see that there is no way it could have been written. And meanwhile, while we're still believing that Noah's Ark was some kind of a boat and that it's on some mountain but we can't get to it, is a bunch of bullcrap. There is no boat. There never was. And when I tell people in church, they get mad. And I say, well, look, you have to understand where this originated. Well, that was the Word of God. No, that's what church tells you. That's what the institution tells you. But these are derivatives of earliest writings at a time that was really good. But what gave the Hebrews the power back then was the Ark of the Covenant itself. So we could talk about this all day, but I remember Nova putting a thing on TV about the old pyramid of the late 1990s. It was called This Old Pyramid, and how they made a mockery of the process, as well as the general public's limited knowledge and inherent complacence. I was so infuriated. I wanted to call them up on the phone and say, I can't believe, and they still try to say, oh no, we got a new theory. Remember, a theory is not proof. A theory is a possible way of explaining the evidence. But if you begin with the assumption or the premise that the Egyptians built this pyramid, then you can come up with so many different theories to try and prove it, but it's not gonna answer it, because it's an improper premise. Because the Egyptians didn't build it. It's impossible. And I know I sound extremely upset about this, but if this alone were told to people with as much fervor, teachers telling their students, this story the story that we've been told would no longer hold water. So it's very important. So my second axiom in my story, Alpha to Omega, is that the Great Pyramid was Noah's Ark. ARC. It was a time energy machine, and it was built by the previous civilization because of the mistake. And that is, when you are perfect and you are collective and you make one mistake, that is to believe that you can do what you will with this power by not just choosing to do it. And that was the fall. That was the difference between the angels, because angels are above supreme beings. There is a hierarchy of being, and there's a hierarchy of angels. And the lowest level of angels were divided. The good one said, no, the power must work through you, and the bad one said, no, we can do what we will with the power. And that's where the division came, and that's why the society was destroyed. And it wasn't destroyed by anything but the metaphysics of truth, and that is, truth is trying to reveal itself, and no matter what you do, this truth will never, ever, it will never change, and it will continue. That's God. This God is not a person, it's not out there, it's inside every living thing on this earth, and this being is what led the wise people of that era to build the Great Pyramid just before the devastation. So that's my second axiom. Now, I know I'm asking people to take a leap here, but you think about some of the stuff. It's easy. How come it's so easy to believe in ancient aliens, and that ancient aliens created our world, yet we can't believe in a time machine created by a supreme civilization?
You're right.
Just as wise.
Oh,
right? I mean, but it's all what we've been conditioned to accept, and so these things that divide us, the religion, the science, and the history, are really all the same thing. History and religion began as the same thing, and then what ended up happening was all of the oral. So what I believe happened is that this Great Pyramid was there, and it took years, and it could be activated or deactivated, and its activation was caused by certain celestial alignments. It would a line, and then it would turn off. And then they would come out and look and see what the Earth looked like. Nope, not time. Let's go back in. They'd go back in, shut down, and run again. And then they would look. And then finally, when there were humans on Earth and they had reached a certain stage, that's when it began, and that's when they came out. That's when Noah came out, and I believe Noah was Viracocha. He was Quetzalcoatl. He was Osiris. And these people were mating with their wives and creating gods that lived for thousands of years, while all these savages on Earth were looking at these people, and they were providing them with technology, but not that they understood the technology. It's like giving a child a telephone and say, here, just push these buttons and it'll work. All right, you can talk to Daddy. Oh, 462-1245. Hi, Daddy. Well, they didn't know, but they were given this technology. And they were given all this technology, the ability to communicate telepathically. They were really a very advanced civilization because of these gods. But they reached a certain point where they were satisfied, and of course the homogenation of the species over time. And then finally, they said, okay, that's it. And they took, when I say they, the gods took away the abilities that these people had because they had reached a level, and that's what caused all the confusion. The Tower of Babel incident wasn't an incident in one area. It was the entire Earth was suddenly unable to do what they were able to do for so many years, and they didn't understand why. And they got panicky, and they remembered the stories and the gods, and they started writing about them. And that's when history began. But before that, it had been handed down for centuries upon centuries upon centuries. Because in my belief, we have to go back to 50, 60,000 years, even as far as 80,000 years in the Neanderthal man. Because I believe that Neanderthal are the giants. They were the Hamitic descendants, because you had Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Well, maybe I'm getting a little too far here. I just want you to know that I did talk with Gary Osborne about my believing what was the Great Pyramid, and I know that he agrees with me. I know that he's stumbled onto even more things, and possibly because he read Alpha to Omega and looked for clues to prove some of the things that I believe are really, groundbreaking. And I really think that he has found some things that support that. I just based on some of the things he's told me, I can't help but think. So if we look, one of the things I think I may have told you. Wait, I'm sorry, I've been rattling on much.
That's quite all right. We're actually coming up on a break in a couple minutes. No, everything you're saying is very interesting, and I couldn't do nothing but interrupt you. So why bother interrupting? Because,
well, I just want to make sure that it's clear and that that I'm not just babbling here, because everything to me is so easy to explain. Yet I try to stay in line. I just hope that your guests are equally either amazed or they're not complaining, and that things aren't driving them crazy or anything like that. So,
well, no, you're singing my song. I mean, I've said it all along that the pyramid's more than just some tombs, and I mean, and you're putting out the proof. I mean, really, it's the proof that at least that some stone tooled Egyptians didn't build this thing. I mean, this, and so there, if anything else, hopefully it makes people, look at it a little differently. I've never been to the pyramids. I'd love to go to them, but, that'll probably never happen. But, if it's meant to be, maybe a flood will take me there one day. I don't know.
Well, I just hope that we have enough time to, because like I told you earlier about whatever. Did you see those pictures I posted on your site? I don't think you did.
I have been looking for them, and I can't find them. If you could, if you post them again, I don't know. Was it the L&M Radio Network group?
No, I posted them on Late Night in the Midlands on Facebook.
Okay, so you're gonna probably the best place to do it would be on my personal page, Michael Vera LNM. Because all
right, I'll post it for you tonight. I just want you to see them, and I can't say to anyone, like I said, I don't know, but I know that the metaphysics of truth means that if this has happened, look, we either wake up or things happen.
Yeah.
That's the way God works. And when I talk about God, I'm not talking about a vengeful God. This is just the way it is. The truth has to be revealed, and if we don't see it, then these things happen. But because of Christ, it's not going to keep going. Extinction over. It's done with that. This is the last one, and I'm going to get to that probably after the break. We'll explain a little bit more about the Christ principle, and hopefully people will want to talk, and we'll discuss that, the sixth seal, and the final deception, and hopefully maybe everybody will get an idea. And it's funny because the final deception is the same thing. It's about our perception of things, how we see things based on what we've been told. But what I did when my epiphany happened to me, and believe me, it was God that came to me. It wasn't something. It was Christ's Spirit. It was not anything else. And when it happened, I had been going to church my whole life. You know what I did after that? I tried to go to church, and I realized I can't go to church. I'm sorry, I'm not listening to you, and I'm not listening to anybody anymore. Yeah. I got to figure out what this means, and I'll ask God if. I believe in God, so I'll let God show me. I didn't even, at that point, my perception of God was different than it is today. But by trying to figure out what the future held for us, I was able to get a complete revelation or apocalypse of how everything connects from past to future. And, I can't tell you with any more fervor than I have how important this is, and I hope that I'll be able to explain that after the break in a little bit more detail.
All right, great, Matthew. Hang on with us for a moment. I'm going to throw you on hold here, and we'll bring you back as soon as we get back from the break. So you got that. I do want to get back to things here with our guest, and his website is linked up on the homepage of LateNightInTheMidlands.com or on the homepage of the LNMRadioNetwork.com. So you can go right there. You'll see a picture slider. There you have it. There's Matthew. There's his books. There's the link. Just click on it. And we're going to get back to it now with Matthew Petty. So, Matthew, we're back, and I've offered the invitation to folks who are listening. We've got a lot of people listening tonight. Anybody wants to call in, they're more than welcome to. And what I'll do, if we get a call, I'll interrupt and say we have a call. But, I don't want to take up a lot of your time either. So, by all means, let's pick up where we left off.
No problem. I don't care if people call in and ask questions. It may help to clarify some of the things I haven't said. And if we have to go later, it's your radio station. I'll do whatever it takes. I think we can get through it.
All right, great.
And if you want me back on next Monday, I'll come back and we'll finish it, or we'll talk again. But I really think that this is extremely crucial, because to understand what's coming next is the critical thing, and to understand why it's happening, and how we're always one step behind. But I really believe that a true and earnest desire to seek the right answers to the right questions, and ask the right questions, and you'll get the right answers. That's all I could say. I believe in that. Seek and you shall find. They're the prescriptions of wisdom. And I sound sometimes very emotional with this, but I guess I'm getting to the point where I'll be watching TV or listening to radio programs, and I'm going, I can't believe, I listen to people, and I understand you're talking about this, but how come you don't see the connection to this here? Because not many people can. I really connected a lot of dots, and that's how I can see what's going on, and I hope that, I really would like for people to read the book or sign up at my website, even if they don't read, because what I'm going to be doing is providing a whole new automated system of emails with information. I just want to educate people. So it's all going to be free. If you prefer to buy one of the books for 99 cents because you want to learn more about it, that's fine. But I'm going to be giving most of this information out for free, and I'm just going to keep automating it, and I hope to have everything rolled out by the first week of August, because it's time, and I really think we need to hear this.
Well, I'm on board. I know, but I know some of the listeners are saying, well, who then built these pyramids? And I know you said that, you probably wouldn't even have time to get into that. But, these are things
I said that the pyramid was built by those of the previous civilization.
All
But
right.
this previous civilization wasn't 40,000 years ago, so let me be clear here, because I know I was talking a lot. The previous civilization had to be somewhere between 4 and 7 million years ago. And the Great Pyramid was not just a building. It was an ageless time machine, catalyst to evolution. And it was built by the previous civilization because this perfect civilization made one mistake, and they were trying to teach the next ones, for the sake of their own souls, not to make the same mistake. And so they had to do what they did, and only the wise ones were smart enough to see it, and they did. And they came across, and they were the gods of ancient Egypt. They mated with the ancient Egyptians, who were by far better than any other evolved humans, because they were within the proximity of the Great Pyramid and this device, which was like a god machine.
Okay.
I mean, there's such thing as a god machine. That's what it was.
Questions come in about the Sphinx. Somebody says, how come he doesn't talk about the Sphinx? It's older. So I'm throwing it at you. Hello?
Came much later. To me, these were the effects of the Egyptians doing their so-called magic and sorcery, as quoted in the Bible, later, when after the incidents that created the conflicts, they still had a lot more power. When the power was taken away from everyone else, they still had a lot more, and they were trying to prove the things that they could do. And that's why the Hebrew challenge to the Egyptians was necessary. And I explain that pretty much in my book, and show how the challenge to the Egyptians was to prove that God is above what they had learned. Because the reason why these traits, these characteristics, these abilities that were given to ancient man by the previous race people who were the gods, the reason why it was taken away is because after they taught them so that they could learn and get things, then they had to show them the final lesson, and that is temporal things do not count. You need to seek God. And so when they took everything away, they were panicky. They didn't know who or what God was at that time when all this happened. They thought these people were the gods, but the gods were trying to teach. These antediluvian gods, the people Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and his sons were all the gods of the new race, the gods of the ignorant. I like to call them in my book. I say that, the gods of the ignorant. So. So I'm just trying to paint the picture here so that you understand it was built because they made the mistake to believe that they could utilize this power individually. And that was Lucifer, who was just like all the rest, just as enlightened as all of them, but said, hey, why we could do whatever we want. And that was the mistake. Even though that great society devolved, and if you look at the excerpts from Critias of Plato, you'll see that he's clearly explaining. I think. Let me read this to you. Let me see if I can find it here. I know I had it. Oh, well, perhaps...
Well, it's okay. Take a look. And for the record, folks, lines are open if anybody wants to call in. There are a lot of questions going on in the chat room. I just can't keep up with them, Matthew. So they're going to have to call in.
So they're not asking them on the phone. They're texting them to you. Is that it?
Well, they're basically asking them to each other, I think, and within the chat room about it. And, I see them, but I can't...
How many people are in the chat room?
Oh, quite a few. I don't know exactly. So it's pretty loaded in there, but if people want to get a question to me through chat, the way to do it is with private message. If you don't know how, ask one of our moderators and they'll tell you how to do it. You could private message me. This way I don't lose your question because I'm not going to go running through the chat to find it. So right.
Yeah.
So
they call you.
They could do
and
that
if
or
they call you, then I could talk to them directly. Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. So, yeah, it's 803-317-2264. And did you find what you were looking for, Matthew?
Yes, I did, actually. The excerpt from Critias, which was what Plato was trying to explain the lost continent of Atlantis. And this myth, despite the fact that, it was believed to have been 9,000 years prior to when Solon, which was a family member or relation to Plato, discovered the truth from Egypt. Well, he was going through Egypt to find out, and they believed that it happened 9,000 years ago, but their idea of time back then was they didn't have an idea or concept of time as how far back. To them 9,000 years could have been 90 million, because to them they didn't really know, but what he was talking about was about this previous society. He said this is a real important, I think I read it the other night too, but by such reflections and by the continuance in them of a divine nature, the qualities which we have described grew and increased among them. But when the divine portion began to fade away and became diluted too often and too much with the mortal admixture, and the human nature got the upper hand, then they, being unable to bear their fortune, behaved unseemly. And to him who had an eye to see, they grew visibly debased, for they were losing the fairest of their precious gifts. But to those, like you and me, who had no eye to see the true happiness, they appeared glorious and blessed at the very time they were full of avarice and unrighteous power. And this is to try and show you the level that when you're at such a high level of understanding, there is a much higher degree of responsibility. And so to those who weren't able to see, we would have fallen down on our knees and worshiped these people and said, wow, look what they can do. Well, it was those people that crossed over, not all of them, but 6 of them. And they were the gods to the new race. And like I said, they were in the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid had to be energized, and it was energized when they got in, and then I believe that they understood how the Earth rotated, especially when you look at Gary Osborne's discoveries. You're going to find out they knew exactly how it rotated, where it would be located at nighttime, daytime, and in between on the Earth by the mathematics that are implied specifically. It's mind-boggling. So they knew exactly what it would be pointing to, where it would be, and what stars would line up with their whatever. And then when it would, at certain times, it would just stop, and they would come out, and they would look at the world and see if it was ready for them. If it wasn't, they would go back in. And that is the same thing with the idea of the dove, because there is a constellation called Columba, which is a dove that's in the north, near the North Star. So it makes me wonder if the dove was really, when the dove would be in the right position, it would turn the pyramid off. It was a machine, and they would come out and look and say, nope, their evolution hasn't happened quite enough yet. Let's go back in. And they did that, and they were the time travelers. So to them, a year at something that's traveling close to the speed of light, just so you understand, is exponentially much more or much less than what happens on the outside. So I mean, if we can go 99.9% the speed of light, time would pretty much slow down, almost stop for those in something of a time machine. And I think I mentioned this on one of your shows before, and I hate bringing this up. No, I don't. I kind of like bringing it up. But if we think that there's no possibility of a time machine, like I said, if we think that the ancient aliens did this stuff to us, and that they were the gods of ancient Egypt, then why can't we believe in a time machine? And moreover, how about the fact that the the stealth bomber is not able to be detected by radar. Yet they say, well, that's because it's got smooth paint and this and that and that and this, and, you know, it's got a sleek profile, and, you know, radar can only hit so much. Yeah, okay, but there's one thing that we do have, and that's the infrared detectors that can detect the differences, the heat signatures in different, and, well, why can't they see the difference in the exhaust? And I always believed that the stealth bomber was part of some technology we had been working on since the Philadelphia experiment. Now, this is a belief. It doesn't mean I'm right, but it just seems to coincide with so many other things, and that the stealth bomber actually moves a fraction of a second forward in time, and that's why it's not detected, because it's not there. It's on a different timeline.
Well, Matthew, I think a time machine explains everything the best when we wonder how all these things got manipulated through time. Well, they had a lot of time to do it. So, you know, they were able to, you know, and who knows, they may still be using this technology and altering our future. And that's scary to think about.
Well, I think what they're doing with the CERN, and this again is just a belief or an idea, but I really believe that what they're doing with CERN, and I really believe that what we have flying around in our outer space since the Reagan era, which was called the Strategic Defense Initiative, is really very advanced technologies to avert comets and meteors from hitting Earth. But they're not going to tell us that it's there, because that would imply that we have a grave danger, and that so they're not going to tell us that. I mean, right. And you got to understand that it's okay that they don't tell us. It makes more sense than telling us and having a bunch of people panicking. We don't want that, because we live in a world where people are just not rational enough. And, you know, so I don't blame, you know, the society that we live in for, you know, because we are that society. I mean, we have our temporal desires, and our, you know, the society is a reflection of our complacency, of our failure to seek the truth and want to know more. It's a reflection of our temporal concerns for cars, boats, trailers, food, even. And you can't blame a system that provides it and gets wealthy from it. You can blame them for withholding some of the truths that would change things for the better, but because, you know, like, let's say alternative energies and things that may exist, you can't. That's wrong. But that again is part of the system of greed, and there are people who are greedy, and that's just the way it is. We live in a very imperfect world, and that's why the metaphysics of truth is going to create the next event that's coming, unless we are smart enough to see it. Like I said, the truth is always trying to reveal itself to us. So,
well, you're right.
I hope I'm not.
No, Matthew, you're doing great tonight. I am really enjoying this show tonight because you're putting a lot of information out there, and it's not too much or not overwhelming people. I think it's, you know, and if there's ever a point where they want to stop and talk about it for a moment, they're more than welcome to call in. So,
okay.
But yeah,
cool.
I think the time machine idea, I think, is a fantastic one, because I not kid you, Matthew, for a long time I've said I think that, you know, when you look at the biblical scriptures and you look at how things seem to, you know, you'll get these prophecy people who will say, well, it's all falling in place. This is the prophecies and it's happening. And I'm thinking, yeah, and how do you know they're not using time machines to manipulate all this stuff? And unless someone could prove it's not true, it's a possibility, and it's something we have to consider. And you're showing pretty much where, you know, we could very well, this technology could have been happening since the building of the pyramids. That's a long time.
Right, but the building of the pyramid was 4 million years ago by a separate race. So as long as we understand that the Alpha was them, and that the Omega will be this race, this epoch of humanity that will finally reach a higher level, and we're going to demonstrate how that could happen pretty much overnight. Not overnight, but in relative terms within 10 years or so. And you say, well, how can that be? Well, this is where we have to understand that I want to say something about the ancient aliens now that they talk about. And what I'd like to propose is that these so-called aliens are really the angels that have fallen. And when I say fallen, they were no longer, after they were the ones that tempted the earlier race into making the move, and now they're trying to do everything they can to prevent the sixth seal from opening, which means whether it be Nibiru or a comet or whatever happens that's going to really change humanity, this time when humanity changes because of the Christ, it will not happen again. This will be the final one, and they know that, and they're doing everything in their power. And I know that a bunch of volcanoes have gone off, have been erupting lately, and there are people that are showing pictures of UFOs going in and out of them and whatnot. I really believe that these aliens are not extraterrestrial. They are living under our underground and under the sea, and they are a high technological people, but they're doing whatever they can to prevent this from happening. Now, here's where religion gets so mad at me, because they don't even believe in them, but you can't deny the evidence. The evidence exists. And that doesn't mean that they're extraterrestrial. It doesn't mean that we don't have knowledge about all this stuff, that our government doesn't. It just means that there is evidence here that needs to be addressed. And when you look at biblical stuff and they talk about the fallen angels, well, hey, that's how I see the fallen angels. Okay? To me, angelic beings are separated after supreme being, and we have to reach that supreme being level, which, don't be confused with God. God is above all, and this essence wants to be perfectly expressed in its higher creatures consciously, and then everyone must understand that the power must work through us, not by us, just like the lesser creatures, and how we see how they have such harmony. And that's what we need. We need that harmony, and we had it at once, and that's what we're trying to get back to. That's what the return of Christ is. It's the return of Christ in all of us, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit. But I just want to touch on the genealogical table of nations known as the descendants of Noah. You notice how the earliest scriptures went into detail about who was the father of who and where, and well, these children, so to speak, of Japheth, Ham, and Shem were really regions on Earth, and anthropologically, they really it's just as important as the similarities of oral traditions, because these were handed down before the advent of writing, and yet it existed as these were the father. And where did it come from? So, like I said, mankind had been given these abilities to do things which are responsible for the other ancient mysteries that we see: Göbekli Tepe, Tiwanaku, Teotihuacan, Pumapunku, Easter Island, and the many more, Nazca Lines. These people were able to do it because of the gods, and the gods are what we see in the Table of Nations: Japheth and his sons, Ham and his sons and daughters. It's funny, they only show the sons, and there were women too, but everything was so patriarchal in those days.
Sure.
And that's just the way it was. Like, women didn't have anything to do with it, but there were just as many goddesses as there were gods above everyone else. So I hope any women that are listening understand that I understand that.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, but there was this guy. What?
Oh, I say exactly. You're right. There was just as many women involved. Yeah, go ahead.
There were.
Sorry.
And Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth all had wives, and then they had children, and these people were the highest of beings in a world that was just people that were evolving into human beings today. But in the center of Egypt, everything was a lot different than the rest of the world. That was the headquarters, the center of it all, and that made them special. They were more beautiful, more advanced, and didn't even realize the power that they had until later on, just like a child realized, or just like in the first race, they realized the power that they had, but it wasn't as much. But that's why they were so above all, and they served as as that this is why all of the things that Manetho had uncovered about gods and pharaohs and kings that lived prior were those gods. Now, people say, well, this sounds like a science fiction movie, but it's not. What we accept as fact is based on what we believe to be true or false or science or fiction. But that's all part of what we see and hear, and that's where deception comes in. But there was this guy who died in 1985. His name was Arthur Custance, and he had a master's in Middle Eastern languages, Hebrew, Greek, and cuneiform, and he also got a PhD in philosophy in 1959. He had also completed a thesis and the full comprehensives required for a PhD in anthropology, but he was denied in 1955 his anthropological degree from the University of Toronto because he really believed that Adam and Eve were real people. Now, interestingly enough, his PhD in philosophy was focused on anthropology and the influence of science, technology, and philosophy on various regions of the world. And he authored this thing called the Doorway Paper series, and you can find it online. And there are extensive compilations that were influenced by the Table of Nations. And the Table of Nations is the table of Noah's descendants and their sons. It doesn't show the daughters. But what we see clearly is that these sons outlived all of the other people. Like Shem's grandson Eber outlived everyone, and everyone but let's see, I forget now. Eber outlived all but, oh well, it doesn't matter. He lived for 14 generations. This is showing the distinction between the people that they're writing about, like Moses and Abraham and Isaac, and yet he was alive through all these people who died in 100 years, 110 years. He was alive through them all. Shem was alive through them all. And so when you think of that, you're saying, well, they had to be gods, and they had to be different than us. And that's talked about right in the Bible, in the first book of the Bible, where these guys after the flood are living longer than the people that they were also discussing about. So rather than get into detail, I do in my book, Alpha to Omega, Journey to the End of Time. But the thing is, like I said, I tie so many things together that the specifics at this point, I don't remember all of them because I had to research them, write them down, figure it out, and then write them in the book. And I can't recall everything because I'm not talking just about one thing at one time. So those small details about time and who lived how long is not as clear as I'd like it to be. So please forgive me on that and understand why. But he provided, this Custance provides impressive evidence to support his theory that mankind's spiritual, physical, and intellectual needs have been historically provided by Shem, Ham, and Japheth, respectively. He says that the blend of physical and intellectual attributes were of science and the combination of intellectual and spiritual traits as theology, and that each contributed, beginning with Ham, is the substance of human development after the flood. Now, we heard about that in the Bible, but we don't think of it that way. Oh, how could there be people that are having people and they've, were progenitors of the entire race? Well, they weren't progenitors of the entire race. The evolution happened, and so this is where we see the evidence that prevents theories like Graham Hancock wants to provide that the ancient civilizations that were advanced, what we see about these ancient civilizations is that there were lesser humans that were living at the same time of these advanced civilizations, going back to 15,000 years ago or so. And so why? And the reason why we see that is because of the difference between the bloodlines of the previous society, who mated with their families and their wives and mated with the Egyptians, which gives credence to the ancient gods of Egypt that then became demigods, because the demigods would be an Egyptian who mated with one of the progenitors of the previous race. So this makes a lot more sense to prove that these civilizations existed with the lesser human beings. Whereas in order to determine when the flood happened, it had to happen before all that, because the flood is talked about as a total devastation. All of the deluge legends that emerged across the world before writing, mass communication, or anything took place. All the descriptions and accounts of these things happened a long time before. So it was just that had been handed down for generations upon generations. So if you understand.
I do, but let me ask you this, because I know that there's some people out there who are thinking this, but even with all this information, is it like out of line to still consider that there could have been some kind of extraterrestrial involvement, even not necessarily like they did crazy things to human beings and DNA, but that, they had some sort of relationship?
Well, to me, I truly believe that the offspring of when Noah and that family that came here, they were supreme. They were one step removed from angels. Okay, they were supreme beings that were beginning to devolve. But when we talk about a hierarchy of being and the level of power, they were extremely advanced people. And to mate with even the Egyptians, who evolved in the area in the proximity of the pyramid and probably were a lot more intelligent and more beautiful, of course, that was still a mixture of the race, but it had to take place first through them, and then as the homogenation took place, and there was more throughout. But I don't think, throughout the rest of society, but I don't think that there was, I think that was a misconception of the scriptures that say, when the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair and they had men, and the Nephilim were in those days. I believe the Nephilim, that all of the first race were giants, and they were all, and I believe that Ham was black, Japheth was, and this is according to Custance, and I didn't get into it yet, but Ham was black, Japheth was, or Ham was Mongoloid or black, both of those. Japheth was Indian, from India, the Hindu race, and right. Shem, and Greece, and Shem was the progenitor of the Hebrew race, the final one. Once they took away everything, took away the powers that was given to these men, then Shem showed up. So each one came out, I believe, was in the pyramid and stayed in there until Shem. And each one came out at different times and created their own. And it may sound crazy, but it's the only way that it really could work and answer all the questions and still be consistent with all the ancient texts.
You're right.
But I hope I answered your question, because
Oh well, yeah, sure. I mean, I wondered because I've seen some pictures. Gary Legier has shown, who I trust, has shown me some things that he's pointed out in the Mars pictures, and it almost looks like they've got some pyramid type structures there too. So I wonder if there was any connection. I'm not trying to throw us off course here, but
no, you're not. I mean, I absolutely not. But here's the funny thing, and I really, this will take too much time to get into all of the stuff about Arthur Custance and what he found. But something that Graham Hancock said that was extremely important was, I believe that Custance, what he said about the Hamitic gods, Hamitic being Ham's son, is found in the examination of the Olmec mystery of ancient Mexico. The Olmec heads were all they bore the Negroid look, and yet they were clearly gods that these people were carving out of rocks very well too. So you could tell that they were given the technology, because technology came from Ham, and Ham gave that to all the people, and he was in Mesoamerica, in Mexico. And the research of several archaeologists placed the Olmec at the forefront of any civilization in Mexico, including the Aztecs and the Maya. They were ahead, they were before everything. They were an advanced civilization that appears to have emerged as a fully formed society. And what Graham Hancock says in Fingerprints of the God is that the bar and dot calendrical code used by the Maya is proven to have been invented by the Olmec based on artifacts discovered in Tres Zapotes. I hope I'm saying it right, Tres Zapotes, but which is where the Olmecs originated. But he also said that one of the most important things was that it seems like this place just happened. It didn't. It just happened. There was nothing before it. It just appears out of nowhere. And so I'm going to just give you a few other things as far as what we could see about, like Japetos or Iapetos, IAP, is one of the many major gods in ancient Greek pantheon. And it isn't meant to imply that interbreeding hadn't occurred over time. Interbreeding was unavoidable for all of Noah's descendants as the years progress, and is evidenced by descriptions of demigods born by the procreation of gods and mortals in ancient mythical legends. Pure genealogy could not be maintained and should be understood when considering that that only 8 antediluvian survivors made the journey to the New Age. So over time, they would have had to. Even if they had 12 of their own kids or 14 of their own kids, they'd still eventually have to procreate with someone. And we see a lot of incestual relationships written in Scripture. And we could go back also. So we see Japetos is one of the many major gods. So that's kind of funny. And the Indian branch of the Aryan family also trace themselves back to the same man. Noah is known as Satyarata, who had 3 sons, the eldest of whom was named Japeti, and the other 2 were called Sharma and Charma. Is that Shem and Ham? To the first, he allotted all the regions south of the Himalayas, and to Sharma, he gave the country to the south, but he cursed Sharma because when the old monarch was accidentally inebriated with strong liquor and fermented rice, Sharma had laughed at him. Well, that's according to Indian lore. You know, and when we talk Indian, I'm not talking about native Indians here in America. I'm talking about the people of India in the Middle East. But this is an identical similarity to the ancient Hebrew Old Testament, where Noah's grandson, Canaan, who was the son of Ham, is cursed because of his reactions to Noah's inebriation. These are coincidences, but like I said, if this was all in the beginning where it was all handed down, because the Hindus will tell you that most of their discoveries, most of their stuff was handed down. Most of their sacred texts were handed down orally first, which makes me believe that it was really all mental telepathy, and it was easy to hold. And then when it was suddenly that their powers were taken away from them, they had to figure out their regional languages and how to communicate. They were freaking out, and so they were. That's what the Tower of Babel was all about. It was a removal of power, not because they built a tower. It was because they were able to build so many things, which is evident in all these other things. Now, Noah also bears a remarkable resemblance to the similar gods of ancient Mesopotamia: Utnapishtim, Zasudra, Zixudrus, Atrahasis. You know, these legendary folklore exist for one reason only. They are shattered tales that survive the eons of time because of their crucial significance to the origin and destiny of our species. So that's why they exist. It's not a myth. It wasn't a bunch of Stone Age people who wrote these stories. It's a bunch of people who were given a great degree of ability, and then it was suddenly taken away from them. And that confusion is where we have come to today. I mean, Noah is the central figure, and he's revered in all of the myths of Mesopotamia, India, Greece, Central and South America. I mean, if you look at the legendary gods of ancient Aztec and Inca traditions, we find remarkable similarities in their descriptions of a white man with blue eyes and a silver beard, teacher, benefactor, healer, Viracocha, the ancient Inca god, and the Aztecs' renowned Quetzalcoatl. They're mythical and highly idolized gods of South and Central America. But what do you think these were just myths that they made up because they were savages? No. See, that's our misconception today. So if we understand it this way, then we can understand why we're missing all the clues to what's going on. Because the Tower of Babel incident is when all of this stuff got destroyed. You know, when all of these, all of a sudden it was freak out time and time to write stuff down, and everybody had their ideas, even though they were all the same tales. It was nobody understood each other, and they were all trying to explain, oh no, this happened. Well, they didn't understand each other, so it just was crazy, and they were all talking about the same thing. Do you know that Ra was Egypt's god of heaven and earth, who reigned for 1,000 years, and it was said that he arrived by a celestial bark, a massive ship called the Ben, which means Pyramidian bird from the planet of millions of years. Now think about that. Is that a coincidental legend, or is it really saying, hey, these gods came from the previous race? You know, the fourth age. Quetzalcoatl was the god of the new sun of the fifth age, followed by a catastrophic deluge that destroyed the fourth age. He was a bearded man, just like Viracocha.
All right. Matthew, hang on for just one moment. We've got to take our last break tonight, and then you and I will come back and talk some more. And if we wind up going a few minutes over, then we do. That's fine with me. Back to it with my guest, Matthew Petty, and we're talking about so much. We've been discussing the pyramids a great deal tonight. Matthew has really laid out some great information and so much more. And also, one more thing. If you call in, please be sure your questions are relevant to what we're talking about. Because if it's not, I'm also going to get rid of you. So we will take our first call here. We've had quite a few come in, but again, folks, on the break, I'm not going to pile you up. So let's get David. He's calling in here. David, you're going to have to hold on and call back here, I think, because we've got... Okay, there's Matthew. Yeah, call back, David, and we'll get you on. Matthew, we are back, and I'll tell you, it gets busy on the breaks. People don't want me to take a break.
Yeah, well,
Hello?
you know, at least
Matthew?
they're calling, but the fact that they're not means that maybe they're
all right.
listening intently.
Let's see what's going on here.
Can you hear me?
I see him here, but it's saying... No, we got Matthew. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
There you are. Okay. All right. Yeah. We had like a pile of calls coming in, and it just totally threw me off. So, but we do.
You started breaking up a little, and I'm hearing like an echo in the background. But
that's because we're taking a call here. We've got David on the line. David, welcome aboard.
Oh, good evening, Michael. It's still raining out there, eh?
Yes, sir.
Oh, my gosh. I told my wife about that last night.
We're going to build an ark here.
Yeah, you're going to need one soon, sooner than you think. Matthew, your show is unbelievable and fantastic, and I can't tell you how impressed I am by the plethora of knowledge that you shared here this evening. Thank you. Well,
thanks a lot. It took many years to compile it all, but thank you very much.
Oh, I know what that's like. I've been researching these different subjects myself for 30 years, and I know the more I learn, the more in the dark I seem to be. But Michael's program here of putting different guests on and letting them explain what they know has just been instrumental in my overall understanding of things, along with Graham Hancock. He's just a genius too.
He is a genius for sure, and everything that he provides is certainly extremely helpful in supporting my theories. And I think we have a lot of the same ideas. I'm hoping that maybe he'll get to understand that, you know, in order to answer all the questions, it seems like we're going to have to begin to believe that that this all began from a much longer time ago. And I haven't tied it together yet, because the whole coup de grace comes with the Christ principle and understanding Jesus Christ from a perspective that is a little unprecedented, and it pretty much exposes some of the misconceptions just through the story itself, because there is a battle. But what's your question? I'm sorry.
No. Your explanations are all relevant and all pertinent, and I'm in total agreement with you. The whole idea that Jesus came and died for all of our sins, and now we can all get into heaven. I never did believe that. But
well, let me tell you something. When I get finished talking here, you're going to see it from a different perspective, and you're going to understand it where the dogma is now clarified. See, you know, you can make proclamations, but if it doesn't tie things together, there's no evidence to the thinker. And even though the new born again Christian movement says that thinking is bad, I say no. Christ himself said, "Seek and you shall find." So the only way you seek is when you ask questions and when you want to know the answers. You don't ask a person who runs a church for the answers. I mean, you can listen to him and agree or disagree, but his word isn't the truth. The truth is the word that you understand within the truth of all, where it connects more things together than it and answers more questions than it leaves on the table. And so what we have to understand is there is a battle, and it goes way back to the very first race. And when the idea that you could have the power and then you could utilize it with your own will, that was the mistake. You must allow it to work through you, not by you, especially when you're in a collective state. And everyone benefits that way. And it's if you didn't hear me the other night, the metaphysics of truth really is the proof that and if you want to, you can read it. It's only 99 cents. It's called The Metaphysics of Truth, Unobserved Realities and the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. You can get it on Amazon.com, and, you know, it'd be great just to help me out by going there, because it just makes it get higher up and people start looking at it. But it's so important. And I spent, Michael, probably an hour and a half on it the other night.
Yes, you did. And I wanted to comment quickly on the whole born-again thing. To understand that is, the born-again, they want you to remain as a child. They want you to ask questions and not seek answers. And that's what the whole born-again thing is about. But, sorry, I just had to throw that in there. But yeah, you're right.
And you know what? I still say that no matter what, if they believe in Christ, they're a lot better than those that don't. And I'm going to explain that to you in a moment. In fact, if you don't have a specific question for me, Robert, I'll move on.
No, I wanted to ask you this evening if what your feelings were concerning the September 28th event that's approaching shortly, and do you think that the planet is going to flip 90 degrees, or it's going to stay right where it's at?
Well, I can tell you this. I don't know what is going to happen. I know that I've been waiting for the sixth seal for a long time, and the sixth seal says there was the sun turned black as sackcloth, the moon turned blood red, and all the stars fell from heaven like a fig tree shakes its fruit in a winter gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is rolled up, and all the mountains and islands were removed from their places. And then all the generals and the slave and the rich and the strong and the free all hid in the rocks and and in the caves, calling out, "Hide us from the wrath of the Lamb, because the day of his wrath is come, and who can stand before it?" Well, let me tell you this. The wrath of God is a misnomer to us. Like I said in the Metaphysics of Truth, there is nothing bad. What bad experiences are the first step to progress. We either learn things through the harsh experiences that enlighten us because of our continued failures and our continued mistakes, or we figure out our mistakes before we make them through our wisdom, and then we move forward that way. But it's still progress. But what we have to understand is what the true battle is that's going on right now. And that true battle is between now, when you talk about power at the highest levels, if we're talking about the alpha and the omega, if we talk about at the alpha stage when man was all connected and perfect, and someone, in this case, we'll use the term Lucifer as the angel who tempted and said, hey, look, you got the power. You can do whatever you want with it. And, okay, they believed and they did. And then they realized, oh, no, we just ruined this whole collective thing. Well, we'll do everything we can to keep it together. But it slowly got debased as the excerpts from Critias that I had read to you happened. But even at the time of their death and destruction, they were still superhuman. And that's so important, and that's why they were the gods of ancient time and not the ancient aliens. But the aliens were thrown down to earth. Not the aliens, but the angels, Lucifer and were thrown down to earth. They are the fallen species. And what we see, these angels that are flying around, the devil has its grips, because this era never really knew the truth for good. Because in teaching us what was going on, they gave us the ability and the power first, and then they gave us the intellect, and then they took away the power that we had from us. When I say they, I'm talking about the gods that came here, and when I talk of gods, they're not gods. They were the progenitors of our race from the previous race. And when that was taken away, that's when all the confusion happened. But it had gone on for 50,000 years or more, where we had slowly evolved into these creatures that could do pretty much anything, but we didn't know why we could do them. We were just given that ability. We didn't know why. We were able to speak telepathically. And so when it was all taken away, there was a sudden urge and desperation to report and put this stuff down. But going back to what I said, it was Lucifer who had the reign the whole time. He didn't have to do anything. All he had to do was sit back, because we didn't know, so we were all a bunch of people trying to figure things out, and he was happy because we would never know the truth that way. But right. As time moved on, and the good angels, the good side knows that they can't give us the power. Here is a key, because when we get into the Christ principle now, you have to understand that the good angels know they can't just come and give us the power, because we'll make the same mistakes as the first race. So,
well, there's just too much to learn all at once.
Well, even if we could just be suddenly downloaded with all this information, we would have power, and then the natural tendency is to utilize it for temporal
right.
and concerns, but it has to work through us, not by us. So the angels understand that, and the devil is the fallen angels are like, good, they'll never figure it out, and that was their whole goal. But then the Christ came.
We seem to be too into immediate pleasure.
Well, that's human nature. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just the way our society is, and yet it's about to change. But when Christ came, the only thing that separated Jesus from you and me and anyone else was the circumstances of his birth. Now, they talk that he was born of a virgin. They say, oh, that was a pagan myth. It was from Osiris and whatever. The bottom line is this. The circumstances of his birth and his mother telling him that he was a special person here for a reason, not that she could tell him what that reason was, made him dedicate his entire life to figure out what the meaning to this was. Sure, first he's 2 years old. I'm going to be the savior, and then as he got older, Mom, I'm who? You're what? What? Can you tell me this again? He had to come to grips with that. We fail to see the human side of Jesus, but this was so important. And there is no redemptive qualities if we believe that Christ was just God when he got here, and then it just doesn't make sense. There is no redemptive qualities if he did not transcend the very problems that we as humans face every day. But what dedicated him to finding out, and I spoke in the Metaphysics of Truth about how when we meditate, we don't meditate like a real master does. When you're born without any information from your five senses.
Clean
All
slate.
you're born with is a unique link to the essence of everything. That's why children are so wise and so good, and why Jesus said you have to return and be like these children. But if we want to meditate and try to get to that essence within our being, do you know how hard that is? Because you have to be able to look at things as though you were looking at them for the first time. No associations whatsoever. Color, shape, size, position, up, down, over. It's nothing. It's just like an infant looking at it for the first time. That's what you have to do for true meditation. It is not easy to be a master, and there are very few in the world, but Christ became a master. And here's the key. He became a master like Buddha and the other few masters of the world. But when he reached that position, because of the circumstance of his birth and what he had believed, he was here for another reason. So he believed that he was still a sinner. Now, sin meaning the failure to know all truth. He still believed that he had not answered everything because he still didn't understand what his purpose was. I worked my whole life. He pushed himself so hard, and so he self abnegation. He gave up everything trying to become a master. He became a master, and all the other masters were satisfied when they reached that point, and he still wasn't, because he still didn't know. Well, all right, I'm like Buddha. But what does that mean? I still don't know. So his action to go and get baptized was taking the next step. It's saying, "Hey, I have faith. I'm taking the next step. I'm still a sinner." And he went and got baptized. And all the people around him are like, "This guy, what's he doing?" But in his eyes, he went to his cousin. John the Baptist was his cousin, to get baptized. And then suddenly this miraculous sound, however it occurred, said, "This is my beloved son whom I'm well pleased." Well, he didn't say, "Okay, now I get it." He was like, "All right, well, what's that mean? All right, now I know I am. Now it's even worse. I don't know." And so he took the walk in the desert. And here is the most significant thing about his walk in the desert. This is where we see the Christ, Jesus Christ, walking through the desert. And as he walks, he pushed himself further than he had his whole life. Through all the times he fasted and he got to the point where he was beyond that, and he was so, so hungry. It wasn't Satan there saying, "Hey, if you're God, turn these stones to bread." It was his own internal doubt saying, all these things. If I'm God, how come I can't turn these stones to bread? And then he remembered, hey, you know what? Man doesn't live by bread alone, but by the word. And why are you even asking this? You've done this your whole life. This is what you were here for. You're either going to die or you're going to answer the truth. And he didn't say, "Yeah, that's true, but I'm hungry." He said, "You know what? That's what I came out." It was a wholehearted effort. And he took the next step. And when he took the next step, guess what? Now he had the power to turn the stones to bread. And that's why the second temptation says he realizes he could jump off the cliff. It says that the devil tempted him and said, "Hey, if you're God, just jump off the cliff. The angels will save you." But what he was realizing is his enormous power that finally, first, now this essence, this little essence is becoming ingrained in every cell in his body, and this power is just coming upon him, and he's becoming just like the first race, just like Adam. And he's becoming just so powerful. He realized that he could jump, and then he remembered another scripture. Don't be jumping off a cliff to prove God. This is an ego thing. If you trip, you'll be saved, but don't be jumping. So even though he knew he could jump, he didn't say, "Wow, look at the power." He quelled his ego and the power and took the next step. And then when he took his next step, here is the biggest key. He got to the top of that mountain, and he said, "Wow, I could come down off this mountain and give everyone the same power I have. And I could be at the center of all this. And there will be a superhuman race." And then he realized his purpose for the first time and realized why he couldn't. Because the power must work through you, not by you. If he were to give everyone the power, then everyone would have the power and make the same mistake that was made in the first race. And he would be making the mistake by inserting his personal will into the utilization of this power. That's when he knew that because he now reached his purpose and destiny, he knew that he would be misunderstood and die. And that was that. You talk about absolute humility and a perfect sacrifice. That is, to me, much better of an explanation than anything I've heard in any religious church. And yet it's still, remember, that Christ, whether you believe in him or not, this is the key. Whether you believe in Christ or not,
when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he said, "Thy will be done and not mine," that was what he was saying. He realized that.
Exactly. He never performed a miracle. He didn't perform anything. All of the miracles were the result of someone else's faith. He could have done anything he willed, but he learned that when they came to him and they said, "Hey, we heard you did this, prove to us." I can't prove to you anything. There's nothing to prove, He could have, but that would have been submitting to ego. And so he was never understood. He died, and that's why all the naysayers say, "Oh, that's a bunch of bull about Christ. He wasn't the Son of God. That's just a bunch of bull. That's not real. That's a pagan thing." Yeah, definitely. The Romans definitely sieged Christianity because the true Christians were the Gnostics, and they were the ones that were ended up persecuted and killed. And they were called the heretics when Rome got a hold of Christianity. And now, I don't know who started the born-again Christian movement, but to say that the earth is only 600 years old, and some of the things that they say, first of all, I want to just briefly touch here and let you know that Christ will not be coming back in a body. It's not a bodily resurrection. When he rose from the dead, nobody recognized him, not even Mary Magdalene, not the apostles. Why? Because his body didn't rise. He was the first whole soul. We all have a soul. We all have darkened souls. And that's clear through the fifth seal, which is volume 2 of my Apocalypse Now series. It talks about the hierarchy of being and the darkness of death's revealing. And even though we hear all these people saying that, "Oh, when you die, it's going to be wonderful." You know what? What makes you think it's going to be wonderful? What makes you think that as soon as you die, you're going to have this wonder and stuff? No, the world that we live in is a result of our failures, and so when we die, the only way we're saved is through the blood of Christ, who was perfect. So that's why whatever happens now, this is the last time. And that's why the sixth seal, let me tell you, Lucifer is doing everything he can to prevent that sixth seal from opening, because once it does, what the born-again Christians believe as a rapture, they think they're going to get zapped off the earth. Well, you know what? There's only one way, and that's through death to get to that next realm. And then at that death, if we look at the fifth seal, we see that the white robes that is given to us, washed in the blood of the Lamb, which is Christ, is given to all the darkened souls and told to wait a while till... So when the sixth seal opens, whether it be Nibiru, whether it be a cataclysm, whether it be a combination of that and a world war, no matter what, when all these people die, they will instantly be saved through Christ, because now it's the beginning of the final conflict. And the final conflict is going to be where Satan must show his next hand. And that is, after there's death, destruction, and everyone's waiting, because they're too short-sighted, they're waiting for Christ to return. The beast, part 1's already in order. Part 2 is, according to the book of Revelation, is the one who was, is not, and is to come. And the whole world followed him because he is to come. Was Christ, meaning it was his body, is not Christ, because it's not Christ, because Christ is not body. And Christ is still to come, and that's why the whole world followed him. And like he said to his apostles, the perishable does not inherit the imperishable. Where the body lies, the vultures will gather. And that's going to create the final conflict, because two witnesses, now I'm really rushing through this quite quickly, but the two witnesses are two people, two of his apostles. I believe Peter and John, I may be wrong as to who they are, but these two people have been alive for 2,000 years or more. And they have been waiting for this beast to rise so that they can come out and talk against it. And when they come out and talk against him, that's going to create the final conflict, because they're going to have the power to, when this beast comes, we're going to be brought into this level that Christ could have given us, but he didn't. And they're going to bring us to this level, and we're all going to think we've reached the epitome of our being, and that's when the two witnesses are going to come out and say, no, sorry, that's not God. And they're going to be able to bring plagues to the earth and make everybody hate them. And then they're going to be killed by the beast. And when they die, they're going to rise again, and that creates the final conflict. And the Battle of Armageddon, just remember this, it never gets fought. Read it. It is when they're arrayed for battle. The final battle is the battle between the truth of whether there's only one question left. We get thrust into higher levels of being almost instantly through technologies that we don't know, through the fallen angels, and the body of Christ that was, is not, and is to come, and that's why everyone follows him. Christ will not return in body, and the Christians get so mad at me when I tell them that. I go, look, he clearly says it. Now, this is what I believe. And, I've believed it for a long time, but I've connected it to so many things, and this is what the struggle is. And we fail to see that this universal fight is going on in higher realms, because Lucifer doesn't want us to know these things. And when it gets to that final conflict, those that are on the right side will be redeemed, and those who thought everything was great are now going to be locked into that realm forever. And everyone's going to get the chance to make that decision. Okay? It's not like why it wasn't given the chance. No. Everything, when we get to that point, there's just going to be one question left to ask and one question left to answer. And I'm telling you ahead of time, so if if it happens, you'll know. But remember,
Matthew,
we need collective.
Matthew?
Yes.
Is that your page on Facebook? That Matthew Petty on the Facebook that I saw yesterday?
I don't know. I mean, do I know you?
Well, I sent you a couple of blogs on there about the new cure for cancer and everything else, and the pyramid at Giza in Egypt. But I just wanted to thank you for your program this evening, and I understand what it's like to have all this knowledge infused into your head, and I've tried to tell people about it that still aren't informed at all. But I love Michael Vera because he's the biggest pessimist I've met yet, but he's got the guests that know what's going on, parts and pieces of it.
Well, thank you, David.
Well, I think he said he was going to run. I think he said he was going to run this again Sunday on Dark Matter Radio. Did you say, Michael?
Yes, I am. This will be run again. It'll also be run a couple more times here on my network, and it's also going to be heard again across the other stations that carry us, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. So it'll get around, and I
hope so. I think it's so important now, and like I said, anyone that's listening, please go to my website, MatthewPetty.com, sign up for just the free bulletin, and you'll get a link to the free copy of the Metaphysics of Truth. Just get there, because I am going to revamp a lot of things, and it will be very informative. I'm going to be providing all this information that I did in the last 2 interviews with you, Michael, and even more, and really break it down in little bits and pieces so that those who are really seeking will say, hey, I've never... I really am glad that I see this, because it links together so many things. The ancient universal battle between truth and our perception of it is about to come to a close, and nothing can happen. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and I just want to go over this one more time, is really the expression of the metaphysics of truth, whereas the first horse is truth, which is always trying to reveal itself. It's the incessant nature of God to manipulate matter and energy till it creates vehicles of life for the sole purpose of becoming perfectly expressed in the physical world, supreme being, the Omega. So the metaphysics of truth is extremely important, and I forget what I was saying. So
well, I have
the first time tonight, but I can.
I have a listener who has been asking me all night to please ask you to fix your contact page. He says he's trying to email you, and it keeps emailing him. He's emailing himself. So I don't know what the deal is there. Yeah, so I thought I'd pass it along because he's really been passionate.
What? He's trying to email me? That's weird. What, on my website?
Yes, from your website. He says on the contact section. And he says it's emailing himself. And sometimes it's a person's email client that they're using. Sometimes it will cause that too. So I don't know. I just thought I'd pass it on to you, and I want to thank you for...
That's interesting. I've got to see this, what he's talking about. Is it possible that you could have him... that's weird. So he tries to email me. He answers the question, puts his email in, and puts a message in, and it comes back to him.
Apparently, that's what's happening. But so I don't know any more about it. He's in the chat room, and it'd be kind of boring radio to go over all that. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've had some. I'll just say one thing. I've had some a lot of funny things happen that just don't make sense sometimes, and there's a lot going on in the technological world that I don't even want to get there. It's a very sore subject with me. I think I might even have mentioned that the other night, but
right.
Well,
David, I got David on the mind now. Matthew, thank you so much. We're just about out of time here, but thank you so much for joining us. And who knows, we could do this again down the pike here. I don't have my calendar in front of me, but I mean we could go on and on about this, and I enjoy the conversation. So thank you.
You're welcome, Mike. I'm glad you had me on the show, and I just hope that I can get people to sign up and stay informed. I'm going to be writing a new book about the ancient aliens, and I'm going to really show how this theory is very dangerous, and it's being shoved down our throats, really, I think. And for those who are looking for answers, and I think it's time to challenge them with a decent challenge. So hopefully everything will work out if we have the time before anything major.
Well, sure.
He asked about when September 28th, and I'm sorry, Dave. What do I think about that date? I heard it was September 23rd. I don't really know about what dates. I just know that something's coming soon, whether it be tomorrow, next year, or it's coming, and it has to, because time's running out. And I don't know if he knows about the tetrad blood moons, but I talk about that on my website as well in the first page. And for the person who was trying to contact me at my website, try reaching out to me on Facebook and telling me what's going on. You can find me at Facebook at Matthew Petty. Go to Late Night in the Midlands, look up my name, Matthew Petty, and you'll find me, Matthew Petty. I have a author page and a regular page. So please connect with me. And I'm Matthew A. Petty at Twitter. So please contact me, because I want to find out. I want to get to the bottom of what's going on my website. Somebody's hacking it, I think.
All right. So. Yeah. Well, Matthew, it happens when you're on to something. It's that Murphy's Law, as we talked about the other night. But I thank you so much. We got you linked up. We'll keep you linked up, and I appreciate it. And we'll have you back here. Again, I'll be in contact with you. I got to look at my calendar and see what we could do, but we'll definitely have you back, and you'll be running again on several other stations. So I thank you.
Great, Michael. If you could send me those links via email, and I'll send you something directly to you, those pictures. It'll be pretty interesting for you to see them.
Awesome.
And until that time, thanks for having me, buddy.
All right, Matthew. Well, hey, thank you too, my friend, and keep up the good work, and we'll talk again soon. I'm looking forward to seeing the pictures too, so thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Have a great night, my friend. All right, everybody, that's Matthew Petty, and